CJSW acknowledges and pays tribute to the traditional territories of the peoples of Treaty 7, which include the Blackfoot Confederacy comprised of the Siksika, the Piikani, and the Kainai First Nations, the Tsuut'ina First Nation, and the Stoney Nakoda, including the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Goodstoney First Nations. The city of Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation within Alberta, including Nose Hill Métis District 5 and Elbow Métis District 6. CJSW 90.9 FM is located on the University of Calgary campus, which is situated on land northwest of where the Bow River meets the Elbow River, a site traditionally known as Mohkinstsis to the Blackfoot, Witchuspa to the Stoney Nakoda, and Gusitsi to the Tsuut'ina. Welcome to Calgary and the SDGs, a special podcast series made by Calgary Catalyst in collaboration with CJSW. This series explores how Calgary connects to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, known as SDGs for short, through local perspectives and the real-world impact of actions in our city. In each episode, our host Josephine is joined by a distinguished guest from the field, offering insights on the goals shaping our city's future. Now let's dive in. Sustainable Development Goal number 13, Climate Action.
Today we are discussing climate action with Leor Rotchild. He's an author, speaker, and consultant with more than 20 years of sustainable business experience as senior director at the consulting firm Upswing Solutions. Prior to this, Leor served as Executive Director of Canadian Business for Social Responsibility. Welcome to the show, Leor.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Leor, recently you published a book called How We Gather Matters, which is all about better utilizing events of all kinds as powerful platforms for societal change. Congratulations on the book launch.
Thank you so much.
Can you share something that's very unique about the book?
Well, so I started writing the book during the pandemic when the events industry was completely decimated. And it was really meant to be a vision for what the events industry could look like when it comes back. But I think that it's really transferable for people who are both in the events industry, people who love attending events, and people who are just interested in sustainability issues generally, because really what I'm talking about is integrating a deeper sense of purpose, something that isn't just an opportunity to have a gathering, but actually to leverage it as a platform to create change. And it's really about integrating a sense of purpose, managing the footprint, so sustainability, and ensuring that these are spaces that are more inclusive, that are bringing in voices that haven't typically been heard before. And it's a way to really amplify events as a huge contributor to making a positive impact in our community. And because we're all touched by events, we all attend events of some kind, it's something that I think is maybe taken for granted, that these events could be they are an underutilized platform for creating all kinds of positive impacts and affecting change.
And events is such a big part of our life, so people thrive through events. This sounds like a great resource. Thank you for sharing about this.
My pleasure. Thanks for asking.
Yeah. So we are going into our questions. We are going to discuss about climate action and where Calgary stands in terms of achieving this goal. So my first question to you is can you provide a brief overview of where Calgary currently stands in terms of climate action and sustainability?
Yeah, what an important question. And just in terms of setting the context, I think it might be helpful to go one sort of level up and just talk about Alberta for a second, because Alberta as a whole has been the last province in Canada to phase out coal. And so that's been a huge contributor to Canada's greenhouse gas emissions. But the good news is that Alberta is on its very last set of reserves. And so it has officially stopped producing new coal and is on course to completely have coal phased out of the energy system in Canada by this year. And so I think that's really positive. I think that's having a fundamental positive impact both on Canada's greenhouse gas emissions and on people's health. So that's, I think, an interesting context in which we're operating from. In Calgary, the city has declared a climate emergency in 2021. So I think that's been interesting. It's created a mandate for really taking more urgent action around this issue. And it led Calgary to develop this climate strategy that's really designed to be a pathway to 2050 or net zero by 2050 with some significant milestones culminating in 2030. And they include some renewable energy investments, especially in municipal buildings, some energy efficiency programs that include both government buildings, but also a retrofit program that involves consumers. And there's significant investment that's gone into public transit and active transportation. And in particular, I think, it's been in the news a lot, the Green Line light rail transit expansion that is really a city-making project, from my opinion, to be able to transport people on mass transit through such a big part of the city, I think has been are really missing. And then I would just add that flood mitigation has been another kind of significant part of what has been going on in the city. The question maybe to ask in all of this is that urgent enough? We know that, when you look at the research, that taking climate action really involves 4 key areas. It's a dramatic reduction of greenhouse gas emissions in the built environment. So there's certainly some of that in here. Redesigning how mobility works. And so there's some transit things, but these things take time. They're huge investments, 30-year kind of projects. So we're moving in the right direction, I think. The other 2 areas are really looking at how we produce and consume and transport food. I think there's a lot more that can be done there. And the other area is around energy. And so, yeah, it's great that we're phasing coal out of our energy system, but our energy system is still a high-emitting greenhouse gas contributor. And while the efficiency is going in the right direction, you might hear a lot of people talking about, well, our energy intensity is going down. That's all positive, but the fact is that oil and gas production is growing because the demand is so significant in the world. But that does mean that our greenhouse gas footprint is also growing.
Talking about time and the other limitations, my next question would be about to highlight on some of those challenges. So what are the biggest challenges Calgary faces in implementing effective climate action?
Yeah, so I think that it's such an interesting challenge, and there's opportunities too. The challenge is that in Canada, we are here in ground zero for where the energy transition really needs to happen. And I think there's perhaps a healthy and vigorous debate about what that energy transition looks like. And so when I talk about energy transition, we are home to most of the oil and gas headquarters within Canada. So the oil and gas producers all have their headquarters here in Calgary. So a lot of the decision making happens here in the skyrise towers. And the debate kind of seems to be around whether energy transition looks like a movement from molecules to electrons, or is it just cleaner molecules? And so you might hear a lot of people talking about carbon capture and storage. This is really about continuing to produce oil and gas like we do, but just capturing the carbon dioxide emissions and storing them underground. There's, a whole podcast I'm sure we could do just about the merits of CCS, or carbon capture and storage. I won't get too into that, but that seems to be the where we are in terms of it. It creates a bit of a barrier because there's a bit of a debate about the future of that, the viability of that as a strategy, and often when people are increasing renewable energy and access to lower emitting practices and policies and energy sources, some see that as a threat to oil and gas. I don't think it needs to be that way. I think you can do and rather than versus, or this or that. And I would just add, in terms of opportunities, that the way we look at procurement could be very different, especially when you're talking to large institutional buyers like governments, for example. The way that they source suppliers, materials, really could integrate a lot more greenhouse gas impacts in that process. And that's kind of an underutilized but significant part of the economy. And the other area that I think is really interesting and underutilized is the opportunity to use events as this platform to engage large numbers of people, both to gauge their interest, their awareness, and their appetite for doing more and new things, and also to innovate, to try new things. And I say that as somebody who has worked with large events in town like the Calgary Stampede and Calgary Folk Music Festival. And we did some things that were really new and different, but because we were doing it as like something that was kind of like an attraction, something that was going to really create kind of a new engagement with the audience, there was a lot of openness to it. And some of the first recycling programs before there was a curbside recycling program happened through the work that we did at the Calgary Folk Music Festival. And so it gave, I think, like an opening for the city to roll things out or to scale things up. And so that's obviously another tie-in to the subject of my book, is to leverage events as a way to engage more people. And I think that that's something that's missing. We need to be engaging more people on climate action, and to do it not from a sort of ideological point of view, but just from this is new, different, better.
You're listening to Calgary and the SDGs, a podcast focusing on how Calgary connects to relevant United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. You're currently listening to an episode focused on SDG Goal 13, Climate Action. To find this and more episodes, go to cjsw.com or the CJSW app.
Wonderful. You have given us a very clear overview of what the current situation of climate action looks like in our city from very different perspectives. Thank you so much for sharing about that. So my next question is kind of tying it back to your work. Can you tell us about the work you do in promoting sustainability in Calgary and any significant projects that you are involved in?
Well, I already talked about the book a little bit here, so I'll try not to dig in too deep. But obviously, it's something that I'm speaking a lot about these days and engaging people on this subject of utilizing events as a way to look at environmental and social impact issues in a new way. But my day job is that I do consulting work. So I support companies and government agencies and others on their decarbonization strategies, supply chain issues. And one kind of interesting example that I'll bring forward is that there's this insurance company called Aviva. They have set a net zero target. And so my team and I have developed a training program for their suppliers to help them set science-based targets. For some of these companies, they're smaller businesses. They have never worked with a consulting organization before. We help them go from literally no awareness of sustainability issues to literally being able to gather their greenhouse gas emissions data, be able to report about it on an annual basis, submit it to the Science Based Targets Initiative, have it approved, answer technical questions. And so it's, I think like a really interesting time to be not just supporting these larger companies who have this net zero mandate, but also suppliers, small and medium-sized enterprises on this journey. So I'm really enjoying that work. And then I continue to advise and support event organizations in the city. So Stampede is something that is an organization that I've done a lot of work with. Folkfest I mentioned as well. Heritage Park is kind of a cultural institution and a tourist attraction in town that I've done some interesting work with. And then there's the upcoming Rotary International Conference that's coming to town in 2025. And I'm doing some interesting work with them too.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for highlighting your work. And it is really nice to hear your expertise and your perspective on climate action. So with that note, I wanted to ask you, how achievable do you think the climate action goals are for Calgary by the target year 2030? And what steps need to be taken to ensure these goals are met?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that right now, climate action generally climate action at the moment is sort of seen through the prism of government action. And I really feel that needs to change because, but I also understand it. Like I gave the example earlier about the coal phase out in Alberta. That was done because of a policy decision. It wasn't that we ran out of coal. It wasn't a technology issue. You might argue the investment into new coal production was drying up, but the reality is that we have a lot of coal in this province. But policy decisions drive action, and so it's necessary for government to play a leading role for sure. And when it comes to government action, it's really about the will. It's really about effectively communicating to voters why this is happening, especially because it requires making investments. And so having the social license with voters to say, we're going to spend this money, it's going to lead to better health, a better community, and a safer planet overall, I think is important. Often when we have these extreme weather events, there's this thing that happens where people say, now's not the time to talk about climate action. We are in an emergency, like we need to deal with this. It is absolutely the time to talk about climate action when we see an increase in floods, wildfires, and it's been hard on those days when the air quality was so bad that I couldn't let my kids out of the house. Like those are absolutely the time to engage people on why taking climate action is so important. And so I think not missing those opportunities is a really essential way of engaging people so that it's not just a government issue, that it is something that we as a community feel that, yes, like we need to be allocating some investment towards taking more action, and that all of us together can take some simple actions, both in our home, at work, and collectively it leads to a significant impact. And we should be measuring not just what the government's doing, but how we as a city are performing when it comes to reducing our greenhouse gas emissions compared to other jurisdictions, both across Canada, North America, and elsewhere.
I love that perception about climate action is not just government responsibility, but it is collective community effort. Thank you for highlighting this point. So my final question for you is a little bit looking into the future. So what innovations in sustainability and climate action are you most excited about? And how do you see them being implemented in Calgary?
So I'm probably a little bit biased because I'm advising this group called Green Economy Calgary at the moment. It's a newer organization that's been set up, although they're very well established in other regions of Canada. And they're working with a lot of smaller businesses on helping them on their journey towards managing their greenhouse gas emissions. And I think that they're an example of what's happening more broadly with small and medium-sized companies who I think are perhaps a little newer to this space than some of the bigger companies that you might have heard about that are, kind of have a more sophisticated, kind of like several years old approach to managing their climate risks. The fact that smaller companies are now getting into this kind of action is really encouraging to me. And I just sort of say, watch this space, because I think that that's the majority of the Canadian economy. And once you've got that level of mainstream happening, then things can happen fairly quickly in terms of creating the reality that, oh, this isn't rocket science. We actually know how to do this. It's totally solvable. It does take time. It does take some investment, but it can move in the right direction if we continue to take focused action. I think that there's also organizations, including the City of Calgary, but also like Alberta Eco Trust, for example, that are making investments into the built environment to create more efficiency and more opportunities for people to install solar panels and things like that. I think all that makes a difference. I think you're seeing new institutions being built in Calgary that are taking climate change into account. So the new BMO Center, for example, that's been built at the Stampede grounds, this like beautiful addition to our city skyline and in a major event space, coincidentally, where the Rotary International Conference will take place next year. But this is an example of a venue that's really taken into account a number of environmental factors that need to be weighed with new facilities, new infrastructure. And I'm really optimistic about the fact that this is now in the psyche. When anybody's building, they need to take into account that there's going to be extreme weather events that impact that facility. So they need to build around those risks. And of course, waste and energy issues and greenhouse gas emissions, of course, need to be taken into account. And then, of course, because I'm talking to somebody who is so, tapped into the issues around accessibility, I think that it's pretty amazing to think that there's still venues that are being built without taking into account like the accessibility by not just people in wheelchairs, although of course that's important, but all kinds of people who are like with like strollers and people who have mobility challenges because they're a little older or visually, have visual ability issues. So I think that it's moving in the right direction, and we need more people aware of these things. We need more people demanding these things, and there needs to be some policy to back it up as well.
I hope it's safe to say that it's not too late. Every effort matters, and if we collectively work together with this awareness, and we can still make a lot of changes in our climate action. So yeah, that brings us to the wrap.
Can I just add one more really quick thing?
Yeah, sure.
It's really my vision for Calgary that I would love it if people from around the world came to this city to experience a tourist attraction or an event that they said, wow, why can't every day of my experience be like what I experienced in Calgary, where I saw a whole bunch of effort go into ensuring that everything that happened, from the flight that I took, the hotel that I stayed at, the venue, the food, everything really took sustainability and local impact into account, and that it was such a highly inclusive, welcoming space that I want to bring that back to my community too.
And in fact, I love that spirit about Calgary. We worked so hard to make sure that they have that amazing impact, which benefits every one of the people in the community. So thank you so much for highlighting all of this beautiful points, and also for taking us through the entire topic of climate action right here in Calgary, what we can do, the challenges, and some of the great things that's happening in our city. So thank you so much for joining me on this episode for Goal 12 Climate Action. Thank you so much, Leor.
Thank you so much for having me. What a pleasure.
This concludes this episode of Calgary and the SDGs. To listen back to this conversation and find more episodes from the series covering other SDGs, visit cjsw.com or download the CJSW app.